Alright, everybody, hope you're doing well. Welcome to a Fix Your Gut live stream. I am your host, John Brisson. Here is the Fix Your Gut website. Up here has our blog with a lot of great research. Here is a list of supplements for both males and females, Optimal Health Blueprint. You can click here and download it. If you need any gut health coaching or coaching in general, you can contact me. If you need health and fitness coaching, contact partner Jason Hooper. Here, if you want to get a copy of Fix Your Gut, 3rd edition. Here is Frontline Performance's liposomal glutathione. It's the best glutathione on the market. It's the old bulletproof glutathione. If you need a probiotic, one of the safest ones you can take. It does not contain any lactate producing or histamine producing strains, a smidge. Of course, I am not a doctor. I'm not a healthcare professional. Any advice that I give, run it through your doctor or healthcare professional. But I am someone who's very knowledgeable in conventional and alternative medicine. So today is what is heartburn, and maybe some tips on how to find relief. So heartburn, in and of itself, also known as gastroesophageal reflux disease, if it's quite frequent, is stomach acid and stomach contents coming out of the stomach through the lower esophageal sphincter, which is a sphincter that connects your esophagus to your stomach, and it stays closed when the stomach's churning to keep stomach contents from going into the esophagus, and it opens up to allow food and water in or vomit to come out. And people with heartburn, acid in stomach contents usually through pressure. Most of the time it's caused by a person having upper gut dysbiosis, usually bacterial dysbiosis, and through fermentation within the stomach or the duodenum. Usually the pH of their stomach is higher. Maybe they don't produce enough stomach acid, or the stomach acid is neutralized by bacteria living in their stomach. There's a lot of gas and a lot of pressure, so it pushes the contents of the stomach upward into the esophagus. A person who has a hiatal hernia could also, the stomach moving upwards when someone has a hiatal hernia can also put pressure and force stomach contents upwards. But usually those are the main causes of someone having heartburn. Sometimes it could be being obese, having too much abdominal pressure from being obese too, laying on one's stomach, especially after eating, because you increase abdominal pressure by laying on your stomach. Constipation and slow motility or gastroparesis as well, because food, and stomach contents remain longer in the stomach, so there's more fermentation generally that goes on, which means more pressure, because it's kind of like a volcano, right? There's a lot of pressure in the stomach, a lot of pressure in the abdomen, and it forces the stomach contents up through the esophagus. Now, you also have upper esophageal sphincter around where your larynx and throat are, and in people with gastroesophageal reflux disease or heartburn, that upper esophageal sphincter stays closed. Okay, it doesn't open, so the stomach contents and the acid get trapped in the esophagus, and it starts eroding the esophagus, because the structure of the esophagus and the mucosal barrier of the esophagus, it can't handle acid fairly well. It can't handle bile. We'll talk about bile reflux in another video. It can't really handle pepsin that well. It can handle stomach acid to some degree. Your body is able to neutralize some acid in the esophagus by producing carbonic andrease, which kind of has like a bicarbonate effect when it comes in contact with the acid. Your esophagus has a pretty thick mucosal layer, and you actually do reflux, give or take 20 to 30 times a day. Bending over, laughing really hard after eating. So you do reflux quite frequently, but if you're refluxing more than that, or the reflux stays longer in your esophagus, or you have dysbiosis in the esophagus from having dysbiosis in the stomach because it travels up with the acid and with the stomach contents that go into the esophagus, it can reduce the mucosal barrier in the esophagus by producing endotoxins. Bacteria produce toxins, triggers the immune system, it triggers inflammation. Some bacteria eat the mucosal lining itself, reducing it. So it can reduce the esophagus's ability to produce mucosa to protect itself from acid. or reduce its ability to produce carbonic anhydrase, the bicarbonate effect, to neutralize the acid. So there's many different reasons why a person, can develop heartburn. But primarily, most of the time, it's because there's something wrong with their digestion within their stomach. Whether it doesn't empty properly, 9 times out of 10, it's dysbiosis of the stomach. There is a rare condition called Zollinger-Ellison syndrome, where a person has these tumors that secrete this hormone called gastrin, and it causes the stomach to produce a lot of acid, okay, a lot of hydrochloric acid. And in those people, yes, that could be the direct reason why they have heartburn, because they have so much acid. That's when the acid leaves and enters the duodenum, it mixes with bicarbonate that's released from the pancreas to neutralize the stomach chyme and the acid. Produces a lot of gas, a lot of carbon dioxide gas, puts a lot of pressure on the abdomen. So not all cases of heartburn are because a person has too little stomach acid production, a high stomach pH, and some sort of dysbiosis. It can be from having Zollinger-Ellison syndrome, having gastrin secreting tumors, and they have too much acid in their stomach. But again, that's quite rare. I've never coached anybody with Zollinger-Ellison syndrome, and I've coached tens of thousands of people at this point, maybe more. So yeah, but it is something that can happen, and usually you see it through an endoscope. I generally don't recommend endoscopes unless absolutely necessary and you can't find out what's going on, because they can't properly autoclave or clean the endoscope. And so you can transfer, bacteria, you can transfer yeast, you can transfer viruses, you can trigger inflammation by sticking the endoscope down the esophagus, into the stomach. You can, injure the tissue through taking a biopsy. So most people, I tell them, this is advice that I would give my clients, and advice I give myself. Of course, discuss it with your healthcare professional, obviously, is that I wouldn't get an endoscope just all willy-nilly, because you have to be, you also have to be sedated too when you get an endoscope, which has its own set of risks. But you have to weigh, if you have heartburn, try some things first. Try some recommendations that I'm about to give. All right. If they don't help, and you're still dealing with gastroesophageal reflux disease, then you might want to get an endoscope. I definitely would probably contact me with coaching and try to figure out exactly what's going on first. And usually most people are worried about Barrett's esophagus, which is kind of the structure of the esophageal cells changed to kind of match the structure of the cells in the duodenum. Most of the time, Barrett's esophagus, which does increase your cancer risk, by the way, esophageal cancer risk, if you have Barrett's esophagus, acid doesn't seem to really cause Barrett's esophagus or gastroesophageal reflux disease unless it's very severe and very long-term that you've been suffering from it. Bile reflux, on the other hand, does seem to be the main cause of Barrett's esophagus. So if you're dealing with GERD, your risk of Barrett's esophagus is quite low, unless you've been having heartburn and gastroesophageal reflux disease for years and years and years. So if you're wondering, I should get an endoscope just to kind of see, if I have Barrett's esophagus. And Barrett's esophagus can be reversed too. The esophagus can heal itself, and Barrett's can be reversed. I've seen it happen. Most gastroenterologists will tell you that it's usually not possible, but I've seen it happen time and time again. The body can heal itself. God gave us the necessary mechanisms for the body to heal once you take the offending agent away. So usually endoscopes I recommend if someone has severe stomach pain or abdominal pain or severe burning, or you've tried things for the reflux and it's just not going away. After a while, you might want to go get an endoscopy done, an endoscope test. But generally, I don't recommend people rush out and get one. Okay, so here's some tips for what to do if you have heartburn. Okay, so first we're going to talk about dietary and lifestyle changes. These are the easiest, but sometimes the hardest to implement. Okay, they're easy because they don't really cost anything. They're difficult to deal with implement, because healthy habits are quite difficult. No one, you got to keep doing it to make it. You have to be mindful. So one of the first things to do is eating eating meals 3 times a day, and no snacking in between meals, because the more you snack, it interrupts the migrating motor complex and stomach emptying and intestinal motility, which in some people can lead to constipation, and an increase of abdominal pressure can lead to reflux if you're constipated. Okay, so the first step is to eat 2 to 3 meals a day. Second thing is to try to eat your first meal outside if all possible, if it's warm enough. Get some blue light through your retinas. Start the day. It's good for your circadian rhythm. It's good for motility, with serotonin production. I also would recommend not to ingest too much liquid during meals, because it can make it more difficult for the stomach to churn if it has a lot of liquid in there to digest. Because that's how your stomach digests foods, is the release of hydrochloric acid by the peritoneal cells. And the release of digestive enzymes like pepsin, protease, and so it also requires mechanical digestion in the stomach as well, right? So it has to beat against the walls of the stomach, kind of like a rhythmic motion. The stomach churns to digest food. Okay, so you don't want to interrupt that by drinking a ton of water, especially a ton of alkaline water, which would, you want to keep your stomach acidic most of the time for proper digestion. I mean, that's the reason why it is acidic, to help break down your food and keep bacteria from living, and yeast and other microorganisms from living in your stomach in large amounts. The stomach, when the pH is low, as it naturally should be, tends to be one of the more, it's not sterile, there's no part of your body that's sterile, not even your brain, but it tends to have lower colonies of microbes, and you want to keep it that way. And most of your opportunistic microbes, like H. pylori, for example, they produce an enzyme called urease, which converts urea, which is produced through normal digestion in the stomach, to ammonia. So they bring, ammonia is very high pH. It brings the pH of the stomach up so the H. pylori can live. And then you start having poor digestion because your stomach's not as acid. Because the hydrochloric acid, it does, chemically break down your food, right? Because hydrochloric acid has a very, very low pH of around 2 or lower in the human body, between 1 and 2 pH. So it does chemically break down your food, and so you don't want that to be lowered. So if you're drinking a whole bunch of water, especially a whole bunch of alkaline water, it's going to kind of bring up slightly, especially if it's alkaline water. The more alkaline, the worse it is for digestion. It's going to bring up the pH of your stomach. You don't want that. You want your stomach to be acidic when you're ingesting food, unless you have a severe perforation or gastritis or an ulcer. Then you got to let it heal first before you bring the acidity of your stomach up. But yes, so you want to make sure that you're drinking no more than 4 to 6 ounces of water with a meal. You want to drink bulk of your liquids in between meals, about an hour or two after a meal. You want to eat your last meal before, if possible, before 6 or 7 p.m. You want at least 3 to 4 hours, if not more, before you go to bed, because it takes about that long, if your stomach is emptying correctly, for your stomach to fully empty. Okay? So you want to make sure that your stomach is empty when you lay down. Now, if you lay on your side, your left side specifically, it does kind of put pressure on the stomach. However, anatomically, even though it puts pressure on the stomach, it does seem to close the lower esophageal sphincter for some people. So some people with heartburn say they do better sleeping on their left side. Some people with heartburn claim that they sleep better on their right side. Usually silent reflux, which I've done a video on silent reflux. Generally, including myself, I felt better sleeping on the right side than I did the left. Sleeping on your back is okay, but it's not as good as usually sleeping on your side for heartburn. Sleeping on your stomach is a huge no-no. It puts increases abdominal pressure. It puts pressure on the stomach. It moves the stomach contents upwards into the esophagus. So if you're a stomach sleeper, you're going to have to figure out some way to stop sleeping on your stomach if you're dealing with heartburn. Elevating your bed. And if you just Google elevating your bed, you usually have to put center blocks under the bedposts of the top of the bed. That can help too as well by putting you at more of an angle, putting more pressure on your lower esophageal sphincter. There's certain reflux pillows like wedge pillows if necessary. You could use those too as well. But yeah, you want to make sure that your last meal is at least 3 to 4 hours before you go to bed. And you don't want to lay down after eating a meal. It's much better if you're tired for you to sleep upright in a chair than to go lay down. Okay? It's simple physics. When you're standing upright, gravity is pushing down the contents of your stomach. All right? And it's keeping it in place because it takes more force for it to go up if you're standing upright than if you're laying down, okay? Because if you're laying down, it's able to flow under your esophagus because the gravity is kind of dispersing the stomach contents equally when you're laying down, especially on your back, but on your stomach too as well because extra pressure. But it's kind of like when you're laying down, think about it. That instead of when you're standing up, and some people actually feel better if they have heartburn just like by like standing up instead of even sitting. Okay, and if you have if you have too tight of a belt or too tight of clothing, that can increase abdominal pressure too as well. So some people after a big meal they'll loosen their belt, right? So you might want to do that too. Sometimes you want to make sure that your pants fit you well, your shirt fits you well. There's not an increase of abdominal pressure by using a belt. I don't think women use corsets anymore, but if you do, that would definitely cause reflux because of increased abdominal pressure. But so yeah, you want to make sure that you're sitting upright as much as possible for proper digestion. You could also go for a brief walk after a meal. You wait about 10 or 20 minutes after eating. You get up, you go walking for about 10-15 minutes. That will help with digestion. Study shows that will help, especially if you're more sedentary. If you exercise a lot, maybe not as much, but if you're more sedentary, it will help with motility. It will help with digestion. So that's also another thing that can be done. We're talking about lifestyle changes. In addition, I guess finally, the last thing about lifestyle changes as far as reflux is concerned is you want to eat slow. Now, I know this is difficult. My grandparents used to cautiously tell me, well, John, you're going to end up with horrible digestion the older you get because you eat so fast. And I would just brush it off to the side because my digestion was like a tank for the most part. I'd get a heartburn every so often, but it was quite rare. I had a stomach of steel. So I would eat, very quickly. And I'm younger, I'm 35. So when you only got 20 minutes to eat at school, right? 20 to 30 minutes to eat at school. And by the time you usually sat down at your table, you had less time than that, okay? So it's kind of like you eat as fast as you could, like you wouldn't inhale your food. And that's not good for digestion. Because one of the ways that we mechanically digest is chewing our food. And the smaller you break down those food particles, the easier it is for the rest of your digestive system to break down and assimilate your food. I mean, that's why we have teeth. It's part of mechanical digestion. So, yes, you want to eat slowly. Be mindful. It's not easy. You want to enjoy your food. You just don't want to scarf it down like a duck, okay? My friends used to make fun of me because I would eat so fast I'd look like a duck, like I would drink water like a duck, okay? They used to say I used to unhinge my jaw and just, stick food in. It's kind of a little bit hyperbole, but, it's true. And I think it did cause some issues with my digestion overall. And I do my best to try to eat slow now. I'm not perfect. Lord knows I'm not. But I try. That's very crucial for people with digestive issues and very crucial for people with heartburn is to be mindful when you eat, enjoy what you eat, and to eat slow. You also tend to eat less when you eat slower because it takes about 10 to 20 minutes through eating a meal for the gastrointestinal system and the nervous system to signal to the brain that you're full through I think it's leptin production. Hold on. I'm trying to think of the full hormone. I can't believe I'm drawing a blank on it. That happens sometimes. I got so much stuff in my head. Yeah, leptin. So ghrelin is the hormone that triggers hunger, and leptin is the satiety hormone. It's the hormone that communicates with the hypothalamus that tells you that you're full. Okay, so it takes time for your body to signal to reduce the production of ghrelin because you're eating a meal, you're not hungry anymore, and to upregulate the production of leptin, telling you you are full. Okay, it takes time for that to happen. It's not immediate. Okay, so the slower you eat your food, and your stomach's filling up with food, you will lose a little bit of weight. The more I'm not saying that you'll be able to shed like 30 or 40 pounds being mindful. Okay, and if you're still eating junk, you might not lose any weight. Maybe, possibly, but if you're eating relatively a healthy diet and you're trying to lose weight, eating slower, of course, is good for digestion, but it's also good for losing excess weight because you eat less. Because you eat less, and then by eating less, because the leptin increases by you eating less, because of time, then you end up eating less food, and you end up gaining at least gaining less weight or losing weight because you're eating less. So that's as far as lifestyle changes, as far as dealing with heartburn. Next is dietary changes. There are certain foods, and I've written a couple of blogs that do worsen heartburn, and there's some foods that don't worsen heartburn. Okay, that are usually stereotypically thought of worsening heartburn. So one of the biggest offenders when it comes to food that worsens heartburn is chocolate. Chocolate increases serotonin. There's multiple studies because serotonin is a muscle contractor, and you would think that it would close the LES, but surprisingly, it does not. It seems like chocolate. It's also fermentable. It's a FODMAP, especially if it contains sugar or milk, and it's got a lot of fiber, and it's quite difficult to digest. And also the theobromine and caffeine alkaloids tend to weaken the lower esophageal sphincter. So I always knew that chocolate made my silent reflux worse. And for most people, chocolate makes their gastroesophageal reflux, heartburn, bile reflux because of the fat content, or silent reflux worse. So usually I tell people to avoid chocolate. Flat out to avoid chocolate. Menthol, which is one of the main components of peppermint, or the other mints. It's a muscle relaxer. So most of the time, you wouldn't want, if you had reflux, you wouldn't want to drink peppermint tea, because when the menthol comes in contact with the lower esophageal sphincter, when it's going down your esophagus into your stomach, the menthol will weaken the LES as a muscle relaxer. So most people with reflux disease tend to have issues with the consumption of peppermint and menthol products. Most of the time, if you have to take peppermint oil, let's say enteric-coated peppermint oil, because you have a lot of diarrhea, because it does slow down intestinal spasms, you'd have to take it enteric-coated so it doesn't dissolve in your stomach if you're dealing with heartburn or reflux too. So mint's a big no-no. Citrus fruits are mixed. There's not really anything in citrus fruits per se that worsen heartburn like chocolate and mint, but they do have a very low pH. So people with an irritated esophagus, you're putting a whole bunch of lemon or lime on your food, that could irritate the esophagus and make the reflux and heartburn be more symptomatic. Spicy food, Capsium. It's kind of mixed with spicy food and Capsium, all right? But Capsium does, which is the main component of spicy food, does reduce parasympathetic nervous system activity and activity of the vagus nerve, which is, the longest nerve in your body. It goes from your brain stem to your tip of your butt, controls the majority of your autonomic nervous system. And your parasympathetic nervous system, when it comes to digestion, is controlled by the vagus nerve. So it can, though, cause gastrointestinal irritation and increase water and maybe leaky gut and cause diarrhea in the bowels. In the stomach, it can actually weaken the LES for some people. Some people feel worse consuming capsium, and some people feel better with reflux concerning consuming capsium. So you just have to see which one. And it's the same with lemon and lime juice, or even apple cider vinegar. Some people who have a lower stomach pH and dysbiosis, when they ingest apple cider vinegar or lemons and limes, their heartburn or GERD goes away. That does happen. You just have to. It just depends on how inflamed your esophageal tissue is, and when it comes in contact with something that's very low pH. For most people, I recommend a supplement, betaine HCl. I have a blog written about it. It's hydrochloric acid, it reduces the pH of the stomach, and it's in capsule form, so it's not coming in. You don't want to open up the capsules. You do not want to open up the capsules, all right, because it can irritate your throat because it is acid, and it has a lower pH than, lemon and lime juice and apple cider vinegar, okay, or vinegar in general, all right? So, but, when you're swallowing capsules, it's not coming in contact with your throat, and it does help with digestion. And many people with heartburn, because most cases with people with heartburn and gastroesophageal reflux disease, it's not too much stomach acid, as we're told. It's generally too little, actually. Too little is being produced, and the stomach pH is too high. Most gastroenterologists don't even understand the gastrointestinal system. It's quite sad. They go to school for many years to try to understand the gastrointestinal system, and they don't. I have a blog, actually. I'm going to bring it up, that I wrote. I'll put it in the show notes, on better habits for minimizing the risk of heartburn. I will put this in the show notes. There's some supplements, again, that I recommend. DGL, you take it 30 minutes before a meal, and the licorice will coat your esophagus and promote healing in your stomach. Zinc carnosine can help. If you reflux the zinc carnosine into your esophagus, it'll bond with your esophageal tissue and help reduce inflammation and help reduce dysbiosis, because zinc is antimicrobial. D-limonene, the same. It depends. D-limonene can be a double-edged sword. If your esophagus is too inflamed, the orange peel oil actually can make it worse. But if it's not too inflamed, you're not dealing with severe gastroesophageal reflux disease. It's actually healing and soothing to the throat, and actually can protect the throat when you're burping up lemon taste through the D-limonene. So there's a few supplements down there. Pretty much all the recommendations that I discussed today is in this blog. If you use the tips in this blog and the tips that I've given in the video, and you don't feel any better, definitely contact me for coaching. I'll do my best to get you better and stop you have gastroesophageal reflux disease or heartburn. But most people, if they read this blog and they have mild to moderate cases of GERD, should be able to find relief, hopefully. So I get, in closing, if you do take betaine HCl, start with 2 capsules and see if that helps with your heartburn. If it makes it worse, stop. Then try maybe some DGL and zinc carnosine to build up the mucosal barrier in your esophagus. And then after a few weeks, try the betaine again and see if you can tolerate it. You don't want to take generally more than 14 or 15 capsules of betaine, because that's a lot of acid. In addition, people who have hydrogen sulfide upper gut dysbiosis may react negatively to the betaine in and of itself. So some people with hydrogen sulfide dysbiosis, I have a blog on that. If you have flatulence and it smells like rotten eggs, or you belch and it smells like rotten eggs, you probably have hydrogen sulfide dysbiosis. Or if you react to foods containing sulfur, like broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, garlic, onions, if you react to them or to meat, and meat makes you bloat and have reflux, and issues, then you might have hydrogen sulfide dysbiosis. And if you do, contact me for coaching, because it can be quite difficult. It depends on how far it's gone on. If it's gone on for a few weeks, you might be able to read my blog and get yourself out of it. If it's gone on for months or years, it's one of the most difficult forms of dysbiosis to deal with. But yes, so I will put this blog in the show notes. If you have heartburn or GERD, do not let your heart be troubled. For most people that I've coached, it can be overcome. And most of the time, GERD and heartburn are easier to overcome than bioreflux or silent reflux. So yes, it just takes, lifestyle changes and dedication. All right, everybody, take care. Talk to you again real soon. Bye.